Hey guys, welcome to lesson 7. So this is the final lesson of the course, and in this lesson I'm going to be talking much more around the AI safety side of things. So far we've spoken about fundamentals, we've spoken about how to build AI systems ourselves, but now we're going to be talking about how we can actually deploy those or implement them safely and in accordance with the different rules and the regulations that are being released around the world now. So I'm basically going to explain the current environment in terms of regulations today, and how that could potentially change in the future. I'm also going to talk about data privacy rules, which obviously apply to AI systems as well. And at the end of this, the key takeaway will be you can kind of audit your own solutions that you could be building, and also some solutions which you might be using from third parties, from software providers. So this will be the key takeaway from this lesson, and without further ado, let's get started. So to get started, I want us to head over to our Notion training page, and I want you to scroll down to lesson 7 and open this. So in this lesson, I'm going to be talking about both the current regulations and also on the developing regulations. So I'm going to avoid doing too much speculation, but talking just about the laws, or the regulations which are currently being debated, and where those are today. So I'm going to do this by going around different regions in the world and talking about only where the AI regulations already exist, or where they're being discussed or debated at the moment, with some road towards some regulations being passed. So to get started, this is a map of the world where every region which has AI regulations today since 2016 is mapped. So you can see here the scale is like 0 to 10 plus, and each country here we can see is the number of AI related bills or regulations that have been passed. So you see there's a lot happening in North America. Also, Russia and China have some, and Europe. There's not to say other places don't have any yet. You can see that there are some emerging, but these are the main centers for where the most AI regulations have been passed recently. But many countries around the world are now discussing these regulations. So let's just get started with Europe, because they've just passed some quite notable AI regulations earlier this year in 2024. So basically, they've just recently passed this AI Act. So you can click this link to read into that act itself. But what I've written down here is basically a summary for both on the AI developer side and also the AI user side, in terms of what this act really means. So basically this AI Act applies to all AI systems which are being used within the EU, regardless of where the developer is based. It also includes free-to-use AI technology. And what they've basically done here is they've assumed a risk-based approach. So what this means is that if you're developing an AI solution that's either for a high-risk area, such as, like, for example, education, law enforcement, migration, anything like this, they're subject to like more scrutiny, these AI models. So also in terms of unacceptable risk. So the idea here is that they're checking to see if the systems could potentially manipulate behavior, exploit vulnerabilities, or perhaps mislead or cause confusion at like a huge scale. So this is their approach, is more, if you're building something for an industry or an application which they consider as being high risk, then it will be subject to like more scrutiny. So the idea here is it's more just around risk assessments, I would say. So essentially these AI developers on the developer side would need to implement these risk management systems and show those to the regulator. Also around data governance, what's going into the data sets, maintaining the technical documentation, so having up-to-date technical documentation explaining how the AI system works or how it's to be used. Having human oversight, so they don't want fully autonomous systems. They want someone who is kind of keeping an eye on that, or a human in the loop, it's called sometimes. So the idea here is around more an approach for being audited. So there's like some very high fines here for non-compliance. So 35 million or 7% of global revenue. And I would say generally, I think that the key takeaway from this is that this is more applying to big tech companies who are developing foundational models. But this doesn't mean to say things that we develop on a more like smaller scale wouldn't be subject to this scrutiny. But yeah, a key takeaway is essentially that the regulators in the EU can essentially do a conformity assessment or an audit of this technology. So the idea here is that this would happen like regularly, and these technology providers need to have this documentation in place and be able to explain how their systems work to regulators. And if they don't comply with that, then it would be a fine. So it's more around having this information management system in place and ensuring that the systems that's being used is not manipulating behavior, exploiting vulnerabilities, etc. Okay, now more for the user side. So if you're using an AI system, I think one of the most key things to be aware of is that you legally in the EU now, you have to be told when you're interacting with an AI system. So that company whoever's developed that AI system needs to tell the users that that's what it is. It can't be like opaque, or these users can't be unaware of that fact. So that's the key one, I would say. But there's also, in fact, in terms of like respecting human fundamental rights, obviously, and there should be human oversight, so providing users with the ability to understand and control the AI's decision-making process. So that's quite an interesting one. I won't dive into some discussion right now. But yeah, data protection is also a key one. We're going to talk about this a little bit more. But yeah, the data protection laws in the EU also apply to AI systems as well. In terms of the US, so there's been a lot of discussion around AI regulations in the US, and most of the regulations that are in place right now in the US are more around encouraging R&D spending in AI, such as the bill which is maintaining American leadership in AI. So this is like a passed on the federal level, and this is more to encourage more R&D rather than regulating how the technology is being used. But there are some proposed regulations which include like the Algorithmic Accountability Act, which are focused on providing transparency around AI algorithms. So to put that into perspective, give an example, this is in some cases social media apps where they use an algorithm to push content to users. And so this regulation will allow an audit of AI systems, including those algorithms for pushing content to users, in order to check that those algorithms are like safe or unbiased or trustworthy in some way. But this bill is yet to be passed, so this is being debated at the moment. Next, if we talk about Canada, so Canada's actually currently advancing the AI and Data Act, which is a set of regulations which are aimed at safeguarding the Canadian citizens from high-risk AI systems and promoting the responsible development of AI. So again, this is, I guess, looks like it could be kind of similar to what the EU has implemented, and you can read a bit more about the Act using this link, but this has not been passed yet. And they do have some regulations though, but these are more aimed at the federal level, which so the government that they need to adhere to when creating these automated decision-making systems. So you could think of this as a way in which they've already implemented AI regulations, but it's just applying to the government sector, like public services. Brazil is also looking into passing a comprehensive AI Act. So they have their own bill that's being debated at the moment, and this seeks to basically prohibit some high-risk AI systems. So again, kind of similar to the EU's philosophy around risk, having like a risk-based approach. So next up, we have China. So China actually has very comprehensive AI regulations already. I think they have more today than any other country in the world. I won't talk specifically about each one of these different regulations, but there's a link here if you'd like to read more about these. But I will talk about what this means for AI developers and users, what these regulations mean. So basically, if you're an AI developer and you're building for the Chinese market, then you need to know that there's a list of restricted areas where these AI solutions aren't allowed to either have like knowledge of those or to solve problems in those areas. So there's like a kind of restricted areas list. There's also this need for third-party evaluation. So you could think of this as being a bit similar to like the EU regulations as well, in the sense that these AI models can undergo regular evaluations by third-party organizations, like including the public sector. And they should be prepared for external audits to check and verify the AI technology. So again, this like regulatory oversight and audits. There's like IP. There's quite a lenient approach to like IP enforcement in China, meaning that there's more encouragement on AI development than around stringent IP regulations. So they're more just trying to encourage, I'd say, the technology to like flourish rather than over more IP considerations. Basically another thing to think about is more on the user side. I won't discuss too much on these two, but more on the user side. So users can basically expect the content to be like traceable, to know where information came from, so like references and sources for when information is being provided, and the idea here is to prevent misinformation. So to be able to trace back to this sort of original verified source in terms of like the country's like verified information. Then data protection. So again, these data protection laws apply to the AI applications as well. You also have a law around algorithmic decision making. So basically like greater scrutiny over recommendations or decision making within like the public sector. So these would be under more scrutiny. And I won't talk about this final one really, but they have a comprehensive set of regulations here. They have quite a lot. Next up is India. So India doesn't have specific AI regulations just now, but they have an upcoming Digital India Act, which is set to focus on, again, more high-risk AI applications. So once again, choosing this kind of AI risk assessment approach. So just targeting more the high-risk systems, which seems to be, I guess, quite a global trend now, which many countries are looking into. And they've also set up recently a specialized task force, which is for specifically delving into AI, ethical, legal, societal aspects. And again, I think the idea here is more encouraging AI development within India, more so than like regulating it too heavily. Next is Japan. So Japan don't actually have strict AI regulations, but what they do have is guidelines. So they've created a set of guidelines in terms of managing and developing AI solutions. So the key documents are the guidelines for implementing AI principles and this AI governance document. So less on the strict regulations, more on guidance. Australia hasn't introduced specific AI governance laws or policies, but they are looking into it, and they're leveraging some current regulations and potentially adapting those more to AI oversight. But nothing confirmed yet, more in the early stages of some discussions. Next, we'll talk briefly about global privacy laws. So first, we're going to talk about what this means for AI developers. So the different global, different privacy laws from around the world. And then after we've gone through those, we'll talk about from the user perspective, what that means, what your rights are as a user of these AI systems. So first we'll start talking about one of the earliest data privacy laws that was passed, which was the GDPR in the EU. And this applies to any organisation processing personal data of EU residents. So these rules apply globally when the users are EU residents. And the key elements of the GDPR is minimizing the amount of data you're collecting. So apps shouldn't be collecting more data than they need. Also, they should be protecting data. So they should have inbuilt security, privacy rules so that this data isn't being shared with those the user isn't aware of or which aren't essential to the service. Also accountability and compliance, so you should actually maintain records of how you're handling the data, your systems for handling data, and logs as well of how data's been moved around. There are penalties for non-compliance, so these can be huge, so like 20 million euros or 4% of global turnover, so really big penalties for not complying with these laws. In terms of the US, there's some notable data privacy laws which apply to California residents in particular, which are quite similar to GDPR in the sense that users actually have a right to know what data is being collected. They have a right to request the data to be deleted, right to opt out, and again, penalties, but not as high as the GDPR penalties. Singapore also has a similar setup whereby basically, this applies to all private sector organizations, so not public sector, and where they're collecting personal data. And these key provisions are that basically organizations must obtain consent before collecting personal data, and the data should be just limited to what is the service that's being delivered. You need to have a data protection officer. So this is someone who's in charge of managing the data within the organization. And there are some hefty fines for non-compliance, so up to $1 million Singapore dollars for non-compliance. Brazil has data privacy laws, which apply also to organizations handling personal data for Brazilian residents. And these laws are quite similar to GDPR as well in terms of right to access, correction, deletion of data. And organizations basically have to notify authorities as well anytime there's been a data breach. So they can't keep this hushed up or secret. They have to notify authorities. And there's hefty fines as well for non-compliance. Basically for the user side, so users have a right to access their personal data, change it, erase it. So you can write to a company and say, I want you to delete all my data, and they have to do that in accordance with the GDPR rules. They can the data they request has to be in a nice format. It can't just be a dump. It has to be machine readable, they can also object or decline certain types of data processing. So they have a right to that. California residents, they have a right to know what data is being collected, a right to delete it, and they also, interestingly, have this right to not be discriminated against for exercising their privacy rights. So if they don't want to provide data, this can't be like held against them in some way. It's quite an interesting rule. And then the PDPA in Singapore, again, you have a right to access, a right to collect data, and you also have a right to withdraw your consent for the data collection and the use. So again, you don't have to provide all this personal data when using some services. Brazil, again, you'll see this is quite a pattern. So right to access, correction, deletion, moving your data in a portable format, and right to know. So basically to request information about data processing that's happening from a company. Okay, so guys, this brings us to the end of this lesson. So in this lesson, obviously what we've covered is the rules and the regulations, and what this means on the side for you. If you're building these AI systems, you need to be aware of potentially some rules that mean you have to build in ways of deleting and wiping that personal data from users, how you can send it to them if they request it, how you can inbuild this like privacy and safety rules into your systems. So these are the things you should be aware of on the builder side. And obviously as the user, you know kind of what your rights are in terms of using these systems, and what the solution providers should be doing in terms of building safe systems that you're using. So these are the things to be aware of. And this also brings us to the end of the course. So I hope you've enjoyed this. And what I really want you to do now is to go ahead and start thinking about your final project, which is going to be the culmination of everything you've learned on this course. And I hope that you feel inspired to potentially take one of the templates we've already created or build your own and submit this as a final project and send it into the Discord group that we have, the community of over 300 other engineers and construction professionals from around the world, and see what they think of the solution you've developed yourself. So I hope you feel inspired and excited to build your own solution at the end of this course. And thank you very much for joining us, and I hope you enjoyed it and speak to you again next time.